And good evening. How's everyone doing this evening? Can you hear me well enough? It's good to see everybody. It's kind of weird talking to y'all via YouTube at night. I'm used to doing this in the morning. John coming here, he's having trouble. Okay, good enough. My sound's coming through, my video's coming through. I always like to check that. I get a little paranoid when I can't see you. Fantastic. Good to see you, Imani. Thanks for coming. Yes, I'm sorry, Rosemarie. This week I have professional development activities tomorrow. So I was already going to do a pre-recorded lecture tomorrow, and technical difficulties scuttled me yesterday morning. I freaking hate Spectrum. I know, Rose. It's nice having you in class. Well, actually, everybody asks a lot of questions, but you do too, and it really makes the class more interesting for me. Hey, what's up? Good to see you, Jaylene. Thanks for coming. Oh, and John is finally here. Fantastic. We have got the whole gang here. Fantastic. Good to see everybody tonight. Let's go ahead and get started with the exam review. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen with you, and I'm going to let you see the exam review that I put up about an hour ago, and I'm going to walk you through it, okay? So here we go. I'm sharing the screen with you. Hopefully you can see what I'm looking at right now. This is the exam 3 review questions. Fantastic. I just made them a little bit bigger so they would be completely obvious. Now it turns out that I'm only going to do 40 questions on this exam. I'm not sure, I just kind of lost the mojo and didn't make as many questions for this exam as I've made for the others. So I'm only going to give you 50 minutes for this exam, so it's 40 questions, 50 minutes. Should be plenty of time. And those of you who have accommodations with the testing center, of course, get your time extensions as agreed upon in your IEPs. Okay? Any questions so far? So 40 questions. Now we are covering Chapter 9, Chapter 10, Chapter 11, Chapter 12, Chapter 13, and Chapter 14. And one of the things you should keep in mind as we move on in these later chapters, where we're covering 2 chapters a week, you're going to expect 5 to 6 questions per chapter. I know I only have 2 for Chapter 14. I just didn't have as many for these chapters. But what you're going to notice is that in general, it's going to be about 5 questions per chapter on the exam. Good evening, Katie. Thanks for showing up today. We're just going over the exam. 40 questions, 50 minutes. Here we go, Chapter 9. Okay, if you'll remember, we talked about the Piaget and stages. Now, let me go ahead and talk about Piaget in all of the chapters. We're going to talk about, there's a question on Piaget from Chapter 9. There's a, let's see, a Piagetian question from Chapter 13. And I almost want to say, crap. Oh, formal operation. And there's a Piaget question for Chapter 11, characteristics of formal operational thinking. So one of the things that I want you to notice as you move through these chapters is I want you to be able to describe to me the last 3 stages of Piaget's development. Concrete operational in middle school, in middle childhood, which is Chapter 9. Formal operational, which is in Chapter 11. And there are people who talk about a 5th stage of cognitive development called post-formal thinking in Chapter 13. Do you see that down here in the bottom of Chapter 13? Excuse me, right here where it says post-formal thinking. So there are going to be several questions on Piaget for this exam. So if you want to go back and find a chart in on Google or something and just study the last 3 stages online, I'm sure any Google document, any Google web page you Google is going to tell you what the characteristics of concrete operational, formal operational, and post-formal operational are, okay? Now, in chapter 9, we talked about school-related disabilities. Remember, we talked about this as being the time when children first go into the schooling system. Middle childhood is from 6 to about puberty. So that's when children are first in school. And these are times when school-related disorders are finally going to show themselves. So we're finally going to see that some children have learning disorders. In chapter 9, we talked about school-related disabilities, the likelihood of them happening, the most common related disabilities. I want you to be familiar with that. So I've got 3 questions on school-related disabilities because I think they are an important part of this cognitive development during this stage. If you'll remember also, over the course of the semester, I'm sorry, Cosette, I just looked at the document. I've been looking at my screen share and I've missed it. Yes, 50 minutes, 5 seconds. Piaget is everywhere. Hi there. How many questions? 40 questions, 50 minutes. Okay, so we're all caught up. All right, so if you remember, one of the things that I've been hammering on you the whole semester is causes of death, and we've talked about throughout the semester. I know it seems morbid, I know it seems dry, but honestly, knowing what the risks are to us at each of these different ages is an important part of the developmental perspective and helping people to grow to live long lives and avoid the risks. And so I want you to know the causes of death in middle and late childhood. What's the most common cause, and a little bit about the second most common cause of death in childhood. There we talked a little bit in chapter 9 about actually self-descriptions. Actually, I think that should go in chapter 10 now that I'm thinking about it. I'm sorry. Self-descriptions and theory of mind actually should go in chapter 10. That's why it seems so short. In self-descriptions, there's, I think it's probably the first or second slide on chapter 9b. Or excuse me, 10A, we're going to talk about how people describe themselves and just the general things that people use to, the dimensions that people use to describe themselves. And then I also want you to know a little bit about theory of mind. What's that final level of theory of mind? We talk about that in chapter 9, so I'd like for you to be familiar with that. And then we talked a little bit about obesity percentages in middle and late childhood. If you'll remember from lecture, I don't know if all of you came. If you didn't, that's fine. But in lecture, I talked about the fact that I umpire a lot of baseball games for 10 and 11-year-old kids, and I'm shocked at how many of those little athletes have round bellies at 9 and 10 years old. And so I want you to know the obnoxious obscenity percentages that you'll see in U.S. children in middle and late adulthood. Do we have any questions about chapter 9? Okay. Any questions? All right. You'll see that I'm going to continue to hit sort of the same themes that I find valuable. Piaget seems to be interesting for the nursing program here at Wake Tech. So I want to make sure that I do a good job doing what Wake Tech wants. I think that causes of death are a very interesting and and important part of the developmental story. So I'm going to keep hitting on them. Piaget, I just want you to know his overarching theory. So I'm going to continue to hit on that. Now, when we get to the final exam, there is going to be a cumulative part of this exam. Guess what I'm going to hit on for the entire semester? I'm going to hit on Piaget, I'm going to hit on Erikson, and I'm going to hit on causes of death throughout life. So you can sort of see these things. So mark these in your notes or in the PowerPoint presentations, whichever way you study, so that it's easy for you to go back to them at the end of the exam, because I will revisit these things at the end of the semester. Is Erikson important? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Erikson, actually, if I said Piaget, I meant Erikson. For some reason, the nursing program here tends to ask a lot of questions about Erik Erikson. And I've had students report that back to me. Now, if some of you go to nursing school in the next year and they do not ask you a lot about Erickson, please report back to me so I can change the focus of this course. But one of the things that students have told me is that they seem to be very interested in Erickson. And really the whole point of this model is that people at different ages are dealing with different important, remember we said they're not crises, but they are important enough to be conflicts. So if you have a teenage patient, they're going to be dealing with identity issues. And how does this treatment make them look? How do their friends think about them? For the people who are in their mid to 20s and 30s, they're going to think about how their illness affects their ability to pair up and have a family. And that's what they're going to think about. When you have the 30 and 40-year-old patient, they're going to be really worried about whether or not their family's okay while they're in the hospital. So each of these different ages is going to suggest that different things will be important to patients. I think that's why they spend a lot of time on Erickson. Actually, you're right, Rosemary. I do think it is quite useful. And I didn't when I was a younger man learning about Erickson because it just didn't resonate with me. But as I've gotten older and I've really thought about my identity development, how I have developed as a human being, he seems to resonate with me even more and more. I like what you're saying. Okay, let me get back to the PowerPoint presentation. So just know Piaget, Erickson, and causes of death are my favorites, so I'm going to talk about them quite a bit. Erickson, in chapter 10, I talked a little bit about friendships. I didn't have many questions for some reason from chapter 10. One of them was about friendships. The popular kids, the controversial kids, the ignored kids. So I have one of those questions where I want you to know those different categories of kids that you'll see in school. When you get into elementary, we're going to start developing cliques, and people's sort of personality styles are going to make them a different persona to the class. Some people are going to be the popular kids, some are going to be the controversial kids, some are going to be the disliked kids. I want you to know those friendship categories from chapter 10. Now, in chapter 10, you see it says match stages to ages. I've got a matching question where I want you to match the stages throughout the life. So I'm going to go back to infancy and trust versus mistrust. And I've got 4. So we're going to talk about 5 or 6 stages during this test. I'm going to test you on the first 4 or 5 in a matching question. Now, we also talked about the value of self-efficacy as a personality style and how it helps your child be more successful in school and in their jobs as an adult. There is one slide in chapter 10 where I talk about suggestions for helping your child develop self-efficacy. I have one multiple choice question where I say, hey, which of the following things would you do to develop your child's self-efficacy? And it's one of those multiple selection questions where you choose all the choices that are going to be useful for helping your child develop self-efficacy. Okay? Is this on 5 chapters? It's on 6 chapters, yes. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Now, chapter 13 and 14 they have just a few questions. If you'll notice, there's only 5 questions on chapter 13. And since I'm not actually lecturing on chapter 14, I've only got a couple questions on that. But yes, from here on out, Cosette, our exams, let's see, our 4th exam is going to be on 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 6 exams as well as a cumulative part. So I'm going to hit the high points from each of these chapters. I'm not going to try to be too picky with statistics and wanting you to know the difference between 10% and 12%. So I'm going to try to direct you in the most general areas so you sort of get a general idea of the development perspective. The final isn't on all of them. The final is on all of them, yes. Yes. Well, by on all of them, Cosette, like I just mentioned earlier, I'm going to focus on Erikson. I'm going to focus on Piaget. I'm going to focus on causes of death. So yes, it's going to be about the whole book, but I'm going to focus on 3 or 4 basic things, the themes that I want you to have developed throughout the class. Does that make sense, Cosette? All right. Now let's move on to chapter 11, 12 questions. I had a lot of questions, the physical and cognitive development in puberty. We talked about sex differences in puberty, who goes into puberty first. Is going into puberty early good for a boy or as well as a girl? Is it better for boys and girls to go into puberty at different rates? So what are the patterns, the sex differences in puberty? So we talked about the process, the body changes, when they happen, and how boys and girls feel about them. I've got 2 questions where I want you to know, the 2 sex differences. So how do little boys and little girls physically deal differently with puberty? Okay. Now, we talked about characteristics of adolescent thinking. Actually, I remember this lecture. I ran out of time and didn't get to this slide. But one of the things that I was going to suggest to you in lecture was that children, even though they have lost that Piagetian egocentrism that we centrism that we talked about in early childhood, that inability to see somebody else's perspective. Teenagers are still pretty self-involved people. I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, all I thought about was Chris, how pretty he was and how lucky he was and who was in love with him and who was not in love with him. Kids adolescents are still pretty egocentric. So if you look on your chapter, I'm not sure if it's 11A or 11B, I have one slide where I talk about the 2 characteristics of adolescent egocentrism, okay? So one of them is the personal fable, and the other is an imaginary audience. Most teenagers think that everybody is paying attention to what they're doing. One of the things you find out when you're grown up is nobody really cares what you do. But if you're a teenager, getting that pimple on your nose is the worst thing ever because you think it's going to change how everybody feels about you. You have this imaginary audience. And also, children at this age have what's called a personal fable. And this sometimes causes kids to do dangerous things and hurt themselves because they think that, you know what, I'm special. I'm driving this car. I can drive drunk. You know what, I'm different than all of the other kids who get in accidents because they drink and drive. This is one of the things when your parents don't let you go to a particular dance, you're going to be like, oh my God, nobody has ever felt as bad as I've felt. Nobody's ever been broken up before. It's a personal fable. You don't understand as a teenager that everybody's gone through the teenage heartbreaks that you have. So those are the 2 characteristics of adolescent thinking. Now, this probably could be a third one, could probably be third sex differences in puberty, but I want you to know about body image in adolescence. How do males and females differ in their opinion about their bodies during puberty? Okay. Uh-oh, I'm sorry, Cosette. I didn't delete your message. How did I swear to God, Cosette, I did not delete your messages. I'm wondering why it's done that. That's quite interesting. I do apologize, Cosette. If you want to ask me a question, go ahead and send me a remind text. I'm looking at the chat bar and I'm absolutely not sure. Yeah, and I'm not sure why. I swear to God, I didn't hit anything. Can you see the messages now? I honestly don't know what happened. I do apologize, Cosette. Please, I was not trying to kick you off the thread. Okay. All right, fair enough. Well, let me carry on. Okay, again, adolescent causes of death. It's a theme with Dr. Roddenberry. Now, we did talk about sexual behaviors being a normal part of the teenage process. In fact, there are 4 questions from chapter 11 related to sexual behavior. 3 of those questions, well, actually, one of them is related to the problems associated with early sexual behavior. So there's a slide that talks about the negative outcomes associated with sex before the age of 13. I want you to know the problems associated with early sexual behavior like that. Then there's a question about adolescent patterns of sexual behavior, pregnancy, and drug usage. Specifically, yeah, I'm not sure why I'm monitoring your comments. Cosette just sent me a text. I'm not sure what happened. I promise I wasn't even paying attention. Yes, you should be able to go back and look at all of the quizzes, John. If you click on them in the grade book, you can't take them again, but you can look at them again if you want. I had a couple of slides in there where basically I was talking about the patterns of sexual behavior. So there's a question, at what age will most children have had, adolescents have had their first sexual encounter? Then there are 2 questions that talk about the U.S. pregnancy rates and drug usage rates compared to other countries. So I do want you to know those 2 demographic questions. So there's a set of 3 slides. What's the pattern of adolescent sexual behavior? And it's going to talk about the problem that's associated with kids who have sex before the age of 13. And then there's a slide on how U.S. kids do with pregnancy and drug usage compared to other children's. So please, children from other countries. There was one slide in chapter 11. It was a picture of a brain, and I talked about the different changes in the brain. In fact, on that slide, I remember it talked about changes in the amygdala, changes in the frontal lobe, and changes in the corpus callosum. Go ahead and read the statement about the corpus callosum, what's it related to, and how does the change in the corpus callosum, the thickening of it, affect our ability to reason in the teenage years. Okay, again, characteristics of formal operational thinking is just that Piaget question. Remember, children during teenage years are logical and for the first time can be critical thinkers, abstract thinkers. Okay, then there's just a general question on the outcomes. What are the problems associated with teen pregnancy? You know, the older I've got, the more philosophical I've become about having babies at different ages. You know, those people who wait a long time until they're really solid economically in the age of the 30s and have babies. You know, the problem with having a baby at 30, you may be more financially stable, but you know, you are raising children for a longer period in your life. On the other hand, if you have that baby at 20, it may be a little more difficult financially at the beginning, but you are free and ready to resume your life in your early 40s. So, you know, I'm not sure waiting to have kids is always such a great idea, but there are specific problems associated with teen pregnancy. There is a slide in chapter 11 which talks about the negative outcomes. So difficulty finishing school, lower economic outcomes, and low birth weight babies are more common. Okay? No problem. Thanks for coming, Ryan. Thank you, John. Thank you very much, John, for helping here. John and Rosemary are like my ushers tonight. They're doing a great job helping manage the crowd. Okay, so that's chapter 12. Chapter 13. There is a little section in chapter 13 that talks about post-formal thinking. While Piaget only suggested that there were 4 stages of thinking, further theorists have argued that there may be a 5th stage of thinking, which is where you are abstract in thinking, but you understand that there are universal humanitarian principles that may sometimes suggest when you break local rules. So sort of a post-formal, an ability to understand that there are gray areas in the world. The world's not black and white. There, in fact, are gray areas in the world. Nope. In fact, John asked, and I took 5 minutes off the exam. So, um, so let's see. So that's post-formal thinking. Okay, there is one question on pre-gaming. I talked about pre-gaming in college. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Go look at your notes and find out what pre-gaming is. There's a simple definitional question on what pre-gaming is. Um, Now, I do want you to talk about patterns of sexuality in early adulthood. You have more sex early in adulthood than you do later in adulthood, and you have more partners in early adulthood than you do later adulthood. Okay. Yes, it is for football. Okay, and then of course I'm going to hit it again. Holy cow, here comes Dr. Roddenberry with causes of death in early adulthood. Two of those. Now, in chapter 14, we talked about socio-emotional development in early adulthood. Basically, I've got two questions on attraction and relationships. With the patterns of attractiveness, what are the things that make people more attractive to us? People who are similar, people who make us laugh, people who are closer. We talked about the qualities that cause us to be attracted to people. And then I gave a long lecture about, a long involved statement about Carol Rustbolt's investment model. She was actually a UNC psychologist, so I got to know her personally for several years. And basically, her model demonstrated that people stay in marriages even when they're unhappy, and she explained those factors that cause people to stay in these unhappy relationships. People have increased investments and a lack of alternatives. She has this very mathematical economic model she calls the investment model, where she measures every quality of a human interpersonal relationship. How much you satisfy me, what my comparison level, what my expectations are, what my alternatives are, what I have invested into this relationship, and how difficult it would be to get out of this relationship. And she has this mathematical model, and she basically shows that long-term relationships are basically interpersonal relationships where you become trapped by your lack of alternatives in your heavy investments. Okay? Oh, please don't start overthinking, Ryan. Okay. Well, I tell you what, those are my, oh my goodness. I am so sorry. There we go. All right, I am back. That's all of the questions that I had for the exam. Does anybody have any questions for me? Please don't overthink. Hi, Victory. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. I do appreciate everybody coming, even those of you that came in a little late. I know that your schedules are really busy, and I appreciate the fact that you even bothered to log in. Ryan, Victory, and everybody else. Ooh, there you go. I take the review and I take the slides and put them in a copy. I make the questions so you're supposed to answer. Then I review that. Actually, I like that strategy, John. I think that's a really good strategy. Oh, no problem. I mean, I just schedule these when they're convenient for me, Ryan, so I know they're not always convenient for other people. And then I read it over and over and over and over. Oh, you're killing me. Okay, folks, that's all I've got to say. I'm going to let you go. Remember, I've got professional development tomorrow. I have to be the student tomorrow. So I am not going to be teaching a live class. I have a recorded video from, I think it was fall of 2021 that covers chapter 14. I know, I'm sad too. Hopefully you can at least schedule and come to one more lecture, all right, Rosemary? And we do have webinar next Wednesday night, so you'll be able to come and show your opinion, share your opinion then. All right, folks, hey, you take care. Have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Good luck on the exam. Take care.